All right, hey there everyone. We're going to talk about the Dunning-Kruger effect today. Now, Dunning-Kruger is very often misunderstood, mostly because it's such a good narrative. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the study. The original study, done by two psychologists, Dunning and Kruger, showed that those who believed that they were quite good at a specific task were actually the worst at that task, and those who understood their own flaws or were less, let's say, confident about their ability did better. And so this is a particularly interesting idea, saying that sometimes you're just like, you're so overconfident, you don't know what you don't know. You think you actually have it all right, but you are ignorant. So this is an idea that became, I think, very popular, especially because it makes a lot of sense to see people who are, kind of like stupid, ignorant, dumb, who would say like, oh, I'm so good at this. And you're like, oh, you actually don't know anything about this. And that's why you think you have a skill. And it's also a very common, let's say, archetype to know people who are quite skilled, but understand like how good people can really be, and therefore see their own kind of the gap between their own skill and someone else's skill. And so this kind of like self-critical mentality also, again, it's a good narrative. It's one that I think we can all kind of understand to some extent. So Dunning-Kruger has been around for quite some time. And the really interesting thing is, while it's often cited, often used in discussion, and people are like, oh, that's Dunning-Kruger, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know who you're talking to, but that happens in my discussions. And so it's commonly used, but the problem is it's actually false. The way that the experimental method that they used to kind of prove Dunning-Kruger determining confidence and skill was more or less flawed, because a random assortment of, let's say, self-confidence and skill would always lead to a similar type of curve. That correlation between skill and awareness of that skill was a natural aspect of the randomization of a thing. And so Dunning-Kruger is actually generally considered to be false, but we kind of hang on to it because of the narrative. And so let's talk a little bit about the narrative fallacy. So this is a cognitive fallacy, and let's be honest, everyone should know their cognitive biases. I would suggest reading Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow by Daniel Kahneman, which is based upon decades of research by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, two Nobel Prize winning cognitive economists or behavioral economists. They themselves kind of brought together these two fields of psychology and economy and created an entirely new thing that tried to explain like why people don't act in a economically logical way. For a lot of times in economics, we would model humans as these like logical machines. And we would say, okay, if you had choice A and B, and A is better than B, then you would choose A. But in reality, we don't do that. Sometimes B feels more attractive. Sometimes, taking a risk is more fun. Sometimes you want to do better than somebody else. And so real life, the way that things would actually pan out, includes a lot of social and psychological behavior, a lot of cognitive biases, a lot of these ideas that were never modeled in economics. And so these two people, they won a Nobel Prize for this because they were able to say, you know what, this kind of perfect model, this idealized form of a human being who's purely logical, is bullshit. And the fact that we have been kind of caught behind this idea in economics has led us to create a lot of beliefs that just don't make any sense. And so let's take the real world, the psychology of people, the actual like behavior, and rather than saying they're wrong and people are stupid, like figure out why they're thinking this way. And so many of their wonderful experiments come from this. I would highly recommend the book. And I also want to talk about generalists versus specialists, the idea of taking two disparate fields, bringing them together, and creating a new field in that sense. We'll get to that next video, but let's go back to our main point, which is cognitive biases, primarily the narrative fallacy. So this fallacy basically says it's much, much easier to believe something if the narrative is compelling. So a lot of times that's something like a story that makes a lot of sense, that resonates with you, that actually like could be true, even though it implies and requires lots of specific things to happen. It's a lot easier to believe something when there's a story with it than something that is abstract and generalized. And so we as humans are storytellers. That is how we pass down our lore, our knowledge, how we teach evolutionarily and generationally. Storytelling is how we learn. It was the first mechanism to actually, understand the world and be able to survive in it. So we're kind of primed for narratives, and this kind of affinity towards narratives leads us to believe a lot of things that actually aren't true. And so that in general is the narrative fallacy. So Dunning-Kruger follows this narrative, something that we kind of like understand and makes sense to us. So it has become really, really popular. And let's, kind of correct the record. this idea of being overconfident and being insecure, having imposter syndrome, they're definitely, realistic ideas. But let's kind of throw away the generalization that those who are that way have a higher probability of being, those who do have higher confidence have a higher probability of being bad at something. So that is the narrative fallacy. That is the Dunning-Kruger effect. And thanks for listening. Next time we will be talking about maximizers versus satisficers. Stay tuned.